Take a person, take a story, take you on a journey. It's your take.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Your Take. I'm your host James Ewen. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see all our interviews. People talking about their lives and their careers, all from their perspective. If you're a television nostalgist, today's episode will be right up your street. My guest was a puppeteer and writer, synonymous for his contribution to children's television. His career takes us back to the 1980s and spans a period of over 35 years. If you search his IMDB listing, you will see all the children's programs he's worked on. He spent around 24 years working for the television company Ragdoll Productions. He wrote the series Playtime, Rosie and Jim, and was a co-writer on Tots TV. His other credits include puppeteering on Corners, Whizz, Leon 5, Hobbs Program, Rosie and Jim, Tots TV, Teletubbies, and appeared as a Goblin alongside David Bowie in Labyrinth. He also played Grandpappa in Boohbah and Mr. Perfect in Blips. Today I talked to Robin Stevens, who gives us his take on his life and career. How does he look back at his 3 decades in television and his new career and lifestyle in the USA? Let's hear his story and call action on this episode of Your Take. A very warm welcome, Robin. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Your Take today.
Well, hello, James. Thanks for having me on.
A lot to talk about, obviously, from that introduction alone, and we'll talk about your career predominantly in children's television. I'm also interested to talk about your life in the US and your current new career, what you're doing now. Before we do so, can we go back in time and go back to the very beginnings?
Sure.
You were born on January the 30th in the village of Chorleywood in the county of Hertfordshire. But what are your memories of childhood, and can you tell us who your parents are, what they did for a living, and do you have siblings?
Yeah. Well, I was born, yes, you're right, in Chorleywood in Hertfordshire in 1960, a little while ago. And it was a quiet little country town, really, in those days. It's not quite the same now, I don't think. But I had a pretty idyllic lifestyle as a child. My mum and dad were called Ted and Frankie, and he was a local solicitor, just a country solicitor, and he had lots of, I think he helped a lot of people. He wasn't kind of a cutthroat lawyer, so to speak. And my mother was a homemaker. And I have 3 siblings, Martin, Simon, and Kath. Catherine's the youngest, and I'm the kind of middle one. I have 2 older brothers, Martin and Simon. And I'm very aware of my American accent. Yeah, I had a great childhood in Chorleywood. Yeah, we ran around, we built bale houses in the woods, and we built go-karts and hurtled down the hill. And there were lots of neighborhood children to play with my age, because I guess I was a boomer. So there were lots of them. And we were just running free. I also used to ride ponies, the horses. That was kind of my hobby. I discovered there were lots of girls there, which I quite enjoyed. So yeah, I used to have a horse at one point in my childhood when I was older. But I used to go to stables and do that as my main hobby, I think, as a child. But I had a good childhood with my family there.
An idyllic childhood growing up.
Yeah, it really was.
Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
You've kind of painted a portrait of your parents, who they were, and you, of course, have siblings as well. I want to tap into creativity. And did you come from a creative family? And can you discuss the things you were interested in growing up? And were there any favorite children's television shows or films? And how did you discover this love for the art of puppetry?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, it wasn't a very creative family, but my brother was a musician. I don't remember my parents being very arty, but we were, my dad built a shed, similar to this one, and where he just gave us a whole shed full of tools and wood, and we were just allowed to do things in there, and we didn't actually lose any limbs. So we were just kind of given the wherewithal just to make things. And I was also sent to a school, that was very creative. I remember my family doing puppet shows for me when I was on my 6th birthday. Actually, my 2 older brothers and my parents rehearsed this secret little puppet show and did it on my birthday. And it was a very magical moment in my life. I remember the magic of this tiny little world being created in this small little booth. And so I think that stayed with me. Yeah, the other thing that really affected me at that point was going to see 7 times the movie Sound of Music. It had a scene in it, the Lonely Goat Herd, where there were lots of marionettes doing a puppet scene, and that really made a big impact on me. Bill Baird did a wonderful job of manipulating those puppets and creating that world, and that also awakened a desire to make my own puppets and do my own puppet shows.
You spoke briefly about schooling, and I want to pick up on your school years because they form kind of an important basis of, when we grow up and experience and learning education and so on. Where were you schooled, and would you say they were particularly happy times in your childhood? And what subjects caught your imagination? And did you have any early career aspirations as a young boy?
Yeah. I actually remember lying on my bed, moving my hands around at a very early age, thinking, I'm one day going to do this on television. I don't know what that meant, but it was, definitely something I always, it's bizarre, but I always kind of knew that's what I was going to do, even though it seems like a pretty bizarre thing to do when you think of your career choices. I was sent to a Waldorf school. I don't know if you've heard of those schools. It was called King's Langley in Hertfordshire, the Waldorf school there. And they don't really believe in teaching you to read or write too early. You don't read or write until you're 7 or something. Then they teach you much more creative type stuff until you're ready to start doing intellectual work. So this was a very creative school I went to. In fact, it was almost a perfect training to be a puppeteer, because we used to do hand exercises every day and voice exercises, and they would even teach you how to do wood carving and handiwork with cloth. So there's lots of different skills involved with being a puppeteer, and going to a Waldorf school was actually the perfect thing for teaching me that.
We'll obviously pick up later on in the interview how you broke into television, but specifically children's television content. Before we do so, I want to talk about your early training and your apprenticeship in puppetry. When did you go to Cannon Hill Puppet Theatre, and can you tell us what you learnt from your training and share with us some of the memorable puppet shows that you worked on?
Sure. Well, yeah, I was doing my A-levels in 1978. The only downside of going to a Waldorf school is that they don't always prepare you necessarily to be a doctor or something. So I didn't do well in my A-levels, and I was going to retake them, and I had also considered becoming an actor, but my father actually encouraged me to pursue my puppet interests. And I always had this idea that I could maybe plant positive seeds in children's minds using puppetry. And So that, and also when you leave a Waldorf school, you kind of have this sense that you have a social responsibility to go and do something positive in the world. So I thought maybe television puppetry might be a way to do that. So in 1978, when I didn't get into college because I hadn't got my A-levels, I wrote to at that time, there were 4 or 5 big puppet theatres in England, which sadly don't exist anymore. There's puppet shows, but mostly they're 1 or 2 man shows, I think, as far as I know. Anyway, I wrote to all of them, and John Blundall was the one that wrote back from Cannon Hill Puppet Theatre in Birmingham. And Cannon Hill, the Midlands Arts Centre in Birmingham, had this amazing puppet theatre, the Cannon Hill Puppet Theatre. He didn't promise anything, but he had a good experience with another Waldorf teacher, another Waldorf pupil, which had worked out well for him. So I went along, and I ended up spending a year there. They didn't pay me, or I was basically a follow spot operator and an usher showing the children to their seats. But that was actually a great introduction just to see how this puppet theatre worked. My father actually supported me for that first year, but sadly, my father died in 1979, and I was going to go work for Rank Xerox as a clerk, and luckily the Cannon Hill Puppet Theatre called me up at that point and offered me a job as a stagehand, basically an apprentice stagehand. And so that's how I ended up there in 1978. Yeah, and 1979, I guess I went to live there.
Losing a parent at a young age obviously would have a big impact on anyone's life. How did it sort of impact on you? Would you say it made you more driven? And can you kind of discuss your relationship with your father? Were you very close?
Yeah, I mean, my father had a theory for childhood rearing, which was not to kind of mollycoddle children. He was all about. He wrote this thing once about how you should benign neglect was a great way of bringing up children, because if you just give them room for them to find themselves, they're more likely to be able to find out who they are rather than some version of who you think they should be. Although ironically, my father always wanted to be I don't think he really liked being a lawyer. I think I think in his dreams he would have liked to have been a kindergarten teacher. So I think in some bizarre way I was kind of living out his dreams in some way. But yes, I went off to Cannon Hill, and I had an apprenticeship there, and I do recommend apprenticeships as a way of learning things. I know colleges are also good, but the great thing about an apprenticeship is you're there in the situation. No one necessarily teaches you stuff, but you just have to do it because you're there, and there's no one else to do it, and you end up learning the things you need to learn. So although I must say John Blundall, my mentor, and Phil Hill, who was the main guy who carved the puppets and made the scenery, he was kind of John's main man. Phil Hill taught me many things, how to wash my brushes, and how, I was sanding for the first year. I just used to sand all the hands and heads, but it's amazing how you would, in the same way that I was watching the performances every day, being an usher, showing the children to their seats, I was also sanding all the hands and the heads. And it's amazing how the lines of those puppets and of the hands and the heads and things kind of went into my psyche just by sanding them. I was following in the footsteps of the people that had carved them, and it was actually a good way to learn how to carve.
John Blundall's name, and you mentioned him as a mentor, comes on nicely to my next question, because it's obviously about him. He's perhaps best known for his early work in television with Gerry Anderson, but that aside, can you describe John's personality and your relationship with him, and how important a figure would you say he was in kickstarting your own career? And can you talk a bit about his methods of teaching and what you learned from him?
Yeah, I mean, John Blundall was an amazing mentor. I mean, I think it's highly unlikely that I would have become a puppeteer without his support. And I mean, the fact that he just brought me in and just let me become an apprentice was an amazing thing, really, because I think quite a lot of people were writing to him at that time asking to come and be an apprentice, but he didn't, not everybody got that chance. So I was very lucky to be given that chance in the first place. And then I was there for 4 years, and he wouldn't necessarily take you aside for hours on end and teach you things. You would be around while he was talking to the actors and giving them notes, and he would take me aside and show me a few things, as did Phil Hill. They both taught me how to carve, and how I would be up all night with them the great thing about being an ASM, which is an assistant stage manager, was that I was a performer, and I was also operating the scenery and making the puppets at night. So I was given access to everything: the lighting, the costume making, the puppet making, the scenery making, because puppetry is an amazing synthesis of lots of different types of art, and they all come together. John Blundall was, a master puppeteer. He had this huge collection of puppets from around the world, and he was a kind of puppet philosopher. He wasn't just interested in the stuff of puppets. He was interested in the philosophy and how the audience react to the puppets, and how he was a puppet philosopher, really, and he was quite a deep thinker. So it wasn't just about, and his designs were amazing. I mean, he would design each show based on the folk art of that particular country, so each show had a different style, and it wasn't just little puppets, in a booth. You could have 20-foot witches, or the whole stage would come alive with animated objects, and the actors were part of the action. We didn't hide most of the time. We were there and if it was a Russian story, we would be doing Russian dancing, and suddenly the besoms, the brooms that we had on our shoulders would become the stage that the puppets would walk on, or they would become that was actually my first job at Cannon Hill, was to be a tree. I was standing on stage holding a broom, and the lighting would, zoom out, so you would just see the puppets, but the broom would either be a tree or the ground or something like that. But it was very clever how he designed and figured out how to create this creative children's theatre, I think is what he called it, more than puppet theatre.
We started by talking about your childhood, and we came on to your training in puppetry and your background and your influences and mentors. We come on now to your career, but before getting your break in television, you spent time working with Down syndrome children and doing a one-man show. Can you tell us more about that particular show and share with us how Down syndrome children would react to your puppet shows and what you learnt from working in that specific area?
Yes. Well, I left Cannon Hill, 4 years later, and because I felt like I was ready to go off and try my own ideas in theatre. And I saw this job being advertised for a puppeteer to go and work with Down syndrome children. I think it was a charity called Cats, and they had the idea that working with children with autism doing puppetry would kind of liberate the kids in some way to become, more part of it would just help them in some way. So anyway, I ended up being the puppeteer there and building puppets with the kids and doing shows with them. And it was actually amazing how the kids would really respond well to performing together and operating puppets. They became kind of much more themselves. They they kind of went from being unable to express themselves to being very expressive and more full of life and way more confident as well. So in the end, they were just the cast. They weren't. I didn't really think of them as people with handicaps. They were just we would just do these amazing shows. Sadly, the whole thing came to a bit of a grinding halt, but it was an amazing experience for a year.
From that experience, we talk about your break into television, but can you recall your first professional television credit and how that came about?
Oh, sorry, going back, actually, I forgot to mention my one-man show, which you asked me about. That was called Old Mr. Greenleaf. And that was actually an amazing experience, just doing a one-man show for a year. Because there's something about doing a one-man show. Normally when you're performing with others, you have to meet your cues and you can't react as quickly to how the audience is reacting. Whereas doing a one-man show, if you lose them for a second, you can just throw an element of the show out and go on to the next bit. And I learned a lot about pacing. And there's something about when you go into television, which is a real problem because you don't have an audience most of the time. So having a very firm idea of who you're playing to is a huge part of being a successful puppeteer, I think, on television, because I just kept in mind all of those kids that I had worked with all those years. Going on to my television career, I was doing that one-man show and I actually got a call from Play School just out of the blue, and I think some puppeteer had not arrived or couldn't arrive the next day. Something had happened and they needed me to come in either that day or the next day or something. It was drop everything and come in if you can, and I did. And they were pleased how I just arrived just like that. And then from that, the fact that I operated this little dragon puppet to they liked what I did. And that's actually, I think, pretty much how I went on to get all of my BBC work, as they, the next producer would recommend me to the next guy down the corridor and I would get the next show. So
in our narrative now, I want to turn the clock back over 40 years to 1982, when you started working for Ragdoll Productions. How did you meet its founder, Anne Wood, and how did that opportunity come about to work for the company?
Yes, well, Anne Wood, I don't know if you remember TVAM, but she was head of children's at TVAM, and the guy who did Roland Rat, the main puppet that they say the rat that saved the sinking ship or whatever, he was called David Claridge, and he recommended actually John Blundall to Anne Wood. So when Anne actually left TVAM, David Claridge recommended that she approach John Blundall, and Anne would commission John Blundall to create and operate a new puppet for her first show, which turned out to be Pob. In the end, John made the puppet, but didn't kind of go on to operate it. But he brought me in as his assistant, and then I kind of ended up being the main puppeteer for Pob. So that's how I actually met, and I was introduced by Roland Rat.
So much nostalgia there.
Yeah.
Roland Rat, I can remember that prime time. I think it was a Saturday night show, and Pob was mentioned, and that's kind of the next chapter in the interview. Where did the idea come from to create the character of Pob and produce the series Pob's Playtime? And what are your memories of writing and producing that series and the reaction from its audience?
Well, Pob was actually Anne Wood's idea. She was sitting on a train in the days when trains had the glass compartments in the sliding doors. And there was a little boy out in the corridor, and she was inside, I think. And he misted up the window and wrote his name on the glass. And she thought she had this idea of a character that in the days when televisions were boxes, I know they're just flat things on the wall now, but in the days when your television was a box, she had the idea that there was a character living inside the box and would actually he would have mist up the back of the screen and write his name in it, and he would be like the character that would move all the shows about and bring the next show in. So he was like a television baby goblin that lived inside your television. Anyway, that was Anne Wood's idea, and I was given this wooden puppet to become that character. And I mean, if you look at most television puppets, they are not wooden. They're, you know, like a Muppet or whatever. So it was it was quite hard to start figuring out how that was going to work, even technically, you know, because I had to carve hundreds of little hands because they kept on getting broke, because we would do lots and lots of different things with Bob. And, you know, I had to keep this wooden puppet every time he got exploded or covered in jam, or I had to keep maintaining him. So anyway, it was a bit, when I remember getting him in the corridor and just looking at his face, wondering what kind of, because Anne was quite keen that he didn't speak, that he didn't have a, you know, he was, and he had emergent speech. The idea was that he was a baby and had that frustration of being a little baby goblin living in your television.
Well, we'll talk in some detail shortly and cover your 24-year tenure at Ragdoll Productions. Before we do so, Robin, I wanted to ask you what skills and attributes are required to be a successful puppeteer, and can you talk about creating characters, their voices, and actually bringing the puppet to life once the cameras are rolling?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about John Blundall was he was also very interested in, you know, different styles of performance around the world, not just puppetry. But if you know, he was very interested in Japanese, and he was quite well known in Japan actually for his work. But if you look at Japanese theater like No or Bunraku, they have a very high definition of movement. So there's not a lack of clarity. There's, you know, when you do something, you do it, and then you stop. And that kind of understanding about performance and what each movement means, like in Japanese art, performance art, was a huge part of what John Blundall taught us. And there's a thing that they used to talk about dolly waggling, because there is this style of puppetry which is, if you haven't got that definition of knowing how to stop and, you know, how to do minimal movements and what they actually mean with definition, if you just keep moving and there's no definition, there is that in the trade is called dolly waggling. But I think, to answer your question, that is one of the main things that you need to understand being a puppeteer is how to understanding what movements mean. So if a deaf child was watching the show, you hope that the child knows what's happening and understands the action even without the words. In my mind, a good television show, you should be able to watch it and understand what's happening from the pictures alone, and the words should support it. But if you're only having to listen to the words to understand what's happening, that's not a good children's television show in my mind.
We could literally spend probably hours talking about the incredible slate of programs you produce with Ragdoll Productions, and they include so many: Rosie and Jim, Tots TV, Boohbah, Teletubbies, Blips, and many more. Do you have a favorite show you worked on under the Ragdoll umbrella? And second to that, can you discuss some of the key people you work with at Ragdoll and what you learned from them?
Yeah, I have to say that Rosie and Jim, I think, was my favorite show. I mean, I really enjoy doing all the shows I did with Ragdoll and at the BBC as well. I mean, I've had a wonderful career and I've worked with some wonderful people. But the team on Rosie and Jim, you know, for 11 years, we kept coming back. And, you know, Rebecca Nagan, who played Rosie, and we just got on so well. And it was just very natural how we, you know, I wrote the scripts, but, you know, we barely looked at them because we would improvise a lot of the time. And when you get to know someone well and you have a great rapport, there's something amazing about work. And the whole team was like that. We all had a rapport. You know, when the hatch opened on the boat, the person opening it understood when it had to open a lot or fast or slow. And, you know, so everyone, even, you know, the Derek balancing on the edge of the boat on this platform, and Nigel going out and Penny going out of their way just to just to make these amazing locations happen. We just had a great team, and so yeah, I have to say that Rosie and Jim was my favorite. The Bob Burke, the designer, I mean, he designed quite a lot of the sets for Monty Python. I mean, he was a very experienced BBC designer when he came to it. He was actually at TVAM with Anne and then left to go to Ragdoll, but he designed the boat, he designed the Tots house, the Teletubby environment. You know, and what was wonderful when I was writing a script, I would phone Bob and say, how easy would it be to, you know, to throw the sofa out of the boat window or something? And he would think about it for a little bit, and then he would come up with a very elegant, simple solution that didn't cost a huge amount, because we didn't, you know, children's television doesn't have a lot of money to spend. But he just working with someone like that because some people find a very complicated, expensive way of doing things, and then someone like Bob, he understands mechanics in television so well that he could make the most quite complicated things happen without it being a song and dance. So, and then Anne Wood, I mean, Anne Wood is an amazing producer, and I mean, just to be taught by John Blundall and Anne Wood in my career was, I mean, what are the chances of that, to have those two amazing people as the people that taught me, you know? So Anne Wood, in her main thing is in understanding your audience, really. I mean, we had a whole department that would film our shows. She would film children watching our shows, the first cut, and then we would have to sit and watch and see whether they understood or laughed, you know. And if they didn't, she would either throw it out, or you recut it or remake it, or, you know, she wouldn't let anything pass unless our audience was getting something out of it, right? So we were actually making children's television that was for the audience, you know, which, I mean, how many people do that? At least, you know, I don't know, but I don't think it's that usual. Anyway, so yeah, I had all these amazing, and the directors and editors and people that I worked with. I mean, they were all so skilled, and I learned so much from all of them. So yeah, I've been very lucky to have worked with some incredible people in my career.
It's interesting because at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned as a child having these aspirations of becoming an actor, and you kind of fulfill that ambition because you have performed in character. And I wanted to ask you, how have you felt performing as a character to the camera without having to perform with a puppet? Has that come naturally to you, or how did you feel about, you know, almost taking that role on?
Certainly a lot easier than puppetry. You know, doing this for hours on end can start to hurt after, you know, we used to get to pain factor 10, you know. It's like, because you're having to just keep performing even when it hurts a lot, because if you don't finish the scene, then you have to do it again. So, you know, that's going to hurt even more next time. But anyway, puppetry can hurt. So being an actor, I mean, I've always thought of writing scripts as the hard bit and performing as the fun bit, really, because I'm writing scripts in order to be able to perform. Yeah, being Grandpapa on Boohbah or Mr. Perfect in Blips was fun. I mean, I had a great time, and it just felt liberating not to. I actually, funnily enough, though, thought of myself as a puppet. So, you know, because I'm doing visual performing, so the way Grandpapa and Mr. Perfect move is more like a puppet than an actual person in my mind. So I don't think I've ever, you know, done actual human performance really, but maybe there's still time.
Before we come on to film, and specifically Labyrinth, we all have idols and people we look up to, and I want to keep on this theme of acting, but who would you say was the actor or the person that inspired you to want to become an actor? Was there someone from Hollywood or someone from television or a comedian that really kind of did it for you?
Yeah, I think, well, John Noakes was a big, on Blue Peter, he was a big he was very brave. You know, he would just do anything for our entertainment. I like John Noakes. But as far as puppetry is concerned, yeah, I guess it was Bill Baird, really. I didn't know it was Bill Baird at the time, but with The Sound of Music, that scene it just captured my imagination. And I actually built my own marionette theatre. Well, my dad helped me sort of the age of 12, and we performed for our local neighborhood because of that show. So yeah, probably Bill Baird, I think.
Want to come on to Labyrinth, and interestingly, a film that I'm very fond of. I saw it recently on the big screen, a re-release, and I thought it stood up incredibly. And oddly, I recently did a photo shoot with a photographer who owned an incredible prop from the film that he bought at auction for about £2,000, I think he told me. And I think it might be worth a lot more than that. And I'll have to show you the actual prop, send you some pictures, because it was incredible. Moving on to Labyrinth, the year's 1986, you appear as a goblin on Jim Henson's beloved film. How did that opportunity come about? And can you share with us your memories of working on that set, collaborating with other puppeteers, creatives, and of course, working alongside the icon, David Bowie?
Yeah, lots of, well, there were several of the puppeteers that I trained with at Cannon Hill that didn't go into television. They went straight into the movies, you know, Matt Wilson and Don Osdin and so forth. And I think they must have recommended that. I think they were short of puppeteers on Labyrinth. I got a call to come into, they didn't say what it was for. And so I got a call to come into the studios one day, Elstree, I think. And so I went in my suit, and I sat down for an interview, and I didn't know what it was about. And then at the end of the interview, he took me down a corridor and opened a door, and there was every puppeteer you could ever imagine, all standing there, all operating and doing, you know, there were puppeteers doing marionettes and that guy that was juggling with the thick balls. You know, it was this crazy scene of all these people doing these things, and I was standing there in this ridiculous black suit. You know, anyway, they wanted me to join in, so I, you know, took my jacket and my waistcoat off or whatever and started joining in. But it was a bit of a shock to find out why I was there. But yeah, I think I shone in the audition doing marionettes, so I spent a lot of time doing the marionettes for Jump the Magic Jump. But I didn't, you know, I know a lot of my friends really enjoyed working in the movies and they did really well there, but it didn't, I mean, it was exciting to see, you know, so many amazing puppets and so many amazing puppeteers working, but it wasn't really my thing. I enjoy being a big fish in my little pond in TV. The movies were just a different game for me. But if you watch the How It Was Made movie, you can actually see me pretty much. We were next to these lights, which were those huge power blazer things up in the grid, like 30 feet up. And so I didn't have a lot of clothes on, to be honest. If you look at this little snapshot in the movie, How It Was Made movie, but I'm operating a marionette pretty much right above David Bowie's head. So I think I dripped sweat on him, but I never actually talked to the guy. He would arrive literally in his car, jump out and do his scene, and then drive away again out of the studio. So we would rehearse all day, but not with David Bowie.
It's interesting you make this comparison of working in TV and feature film. For you, was the process of working on a big feature, was it far too slow compared to, you know, the speed and I suppose a lower budget of working on a small scale TV show?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've always been about communicating with the audience. So if I didn't write it, or if it wasn't coming from, you know, I loved Henson's vision, but it was his vision, and I was a very small cog in his wheel, you know. But so I actually love the feeling of having something I want to say and then being allowed to write a script which would Anne would, of course, would edit and run past all of her educational advisors. And so, you weren't allowed just to make whatever you felt like, but I was right there being allowed to make, realize my own vision, and then have it actually going out into children's lives. So for me, that was what it was about, more than what the actual story was, or it was about that direct communication with the child.
Creative freedom and expression comes on nicely to my next question, because I want to talk about writing, because you've been heavily involved in writing scripts and originating ideas and content for so many children's television shows. Where does your interest in writing and creating fictitious stories come from? And would you have liked to have written a screenplay for a film, or maybe something targeted for an adult audience?
Interesting you should mention that. Yeah. Writing was hard. I mean, because every script that you see, there's probably 3 or 4 that no one does see, that get thrown in the garbage. I've got piles of scripts that never got passed. And, we were drawing little pictures for each scene. So, and you're having to visualize how it's going to be directed, so it's not just a matter of, you're not just writing some dream of what you think might be nice. You're having to actually research exactly how each shot would work and how the design people would figure out how to make that work. And so, writing a script is a long and arduous business, and then to have it just thrown in the bin was quite hard. Anyway, to answer your question, but then just being an actor and having no control over the material that you do, I did not enjoy that, to be honest. So working with Anne, where she actually gave me the ability to actually write my own scripts and then perform them, was the ultimate dream, really, because then you're following the whole vision through. You're conceiving the idea and then following it through all the way to it being watched by children around the world. So that's you couldn't ask more than that. As far as doing adult, I would love. I have got an idea for an adult movie, and I have been writing it for a while. I just haven't managed to pull it off yet and send it out. It's having a movie made is a different thing to having a television show made, because the budgets are slightly different. But yes, I do have a script if anybody would be interested in reading it.
Robin, you've worked in several capacities in the television industry. We touched upon, obviously, puppetry, performance, writing, marketing, direction, and obviously handcrafting the models as well. Has there been a favorite area you've worked in, and if so, why? And then secondary to that, are there any creative areas you haven't explored that you wish you had?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I actually do enjoy, this is my carving this is the original duck that I made. I actually carved him, and then he wasn't the one featured in the television show. So I do enjoy actually, making the puppets themselves. I think performance is my favorite thing. Trying to remember the rest of your question there.
You've obviously worked in so many different creative capacities, but is there any that you haven't explored that you wish you wish you had?
Well, I think I would have liked to have been a crooner, maybe. I had a voice that everyone told me was, I do a great Elvis impression, and I think that's possibly something I didn't pursue, that I could have maybe pursued. I just used my voice very badly and made lots of little high voices like Pob and things, and which was quite hard on my voice. I didn't do a voice like Pob again, because doing a whole 12 hours studio day of doing Pob, my larynx would be was hurting after doing that.
It's interesting that you mentioned music. in another life, would you have liked to have been a musician, and were you a big music fan?
I've always enjoyed very varied music. I don't really have I think, yeah, like I say, I think I would have been a crooner if I'd done anything, but not really. No, I mean, I enjoy all different types of music, really. So I've never. My wife is always quite amazed that I don't know the names of any, stars or I went through the whole of the 70s, I mean, the whole of the 80s and 90s, and don't really know any of them, because I think I was so focused on my career and there's something about just having to churn out hundreds of children's TV shows that doesn't give you room really for much else. So that was most of my life.
I want to come on to the next chapter now, and that was deciding to emigrate to the United States, where you currently reside and live in North Carolina. Have you continued to work in television? And if so, can you share with us any projects you've worked on in the States? And then I want to come on to your second career, which we'll touch upon shortly.
Yes. Well, I live at the top of a mountain in the Blue Ridge Mountains in North Carolina, in Asheville. And there really isn't a television, the television industry is very different here than England. You either have to be in LA or New York, really. And of course, the shows are huge, so it's a very different thing. So when I got here for personal reasons, I did try and get back into television a bit, but then I realized that it was time possibly to do something else. I had been in television for 25 years or 30 years or something, so it felt like it was exciting just to explore different parts of myself, and I have enjoyed doing that. But my wife and I just built this studio, and she's an amazing artist and I'm a puppeteer, so we have plans to join the two together in the middle there to make when I was at Ragdoll, we only had two customers really, like the BBC and ITV, and we always used to dream of the idea of being able to have an aerial on the roof and just be able to broadcast ourselves. And amazingly now, you and everyone else can broadcast from their bedroom. So it is an amazing time where everyone can make television, and we plan on doing that.
You've had such an incredible career, and we've only touched briefly on some of the aspects of it. And these shows are classic children's television shows that are adored by generations and rediscovered. And obviously it must be nice as well that people want to talk to you and speak to you and interview you about your life and some of the amazing shows you've worked on. Emigrating to the US and deciding to change career, was there an element of sadness turning your back on all of that?
Yeah, it was
incredible experience.
It was a bit of a shock to the system, but I quite enjoyed, you have a kind of bit of a charmed life in television, so you kind of get used to people feeding you and driving you around, and there is a slight element of being slightly spoiled, I suppose, working in television. So I think it was quite good for me to sort of find out what it's like for other people. Just have a normal job and have a normal life here. It was a bit of a shock, starting a whole new life in a whole new country, but I do love it here. These mountains are beautiful, and I have a lot of fun here with my friends and family. So it was a shock to my system, but puppetry is a bit of a young person game. My back started to give out, and you're putting your body through a lot of strain being a puppeteer. So I don't think I could have carried on being a television puppeteer for the rest of my life. So it's been fun just to do some other things here. I was living in California for 5 years, and I got involved with all the puppeteers out there. They were very supportive of me, and I worked on a few live shows over there, and I really enjoyed the shows that I worked on.
This second career I want to pick up on, because I find this fascinating. And off mic, you told me that it's your your business as well, but you're currently a sales, marketing, and retail manager for a brand called Noble Cider. Can you tell us what this involves and how did this business opportunity happen?
Well, it's just the natural thing that puppeteers do. You know, once they retire, you just end up sitting in bars drinking cider. No, basically, my nephew Leaf, he lives here amazingly in Asheville, as does a lot of the rest of my family, which is wonderful. But he started a company with his friend 10 years ago, sort of scrubbing each apple by hand in their garage. But now, 10 years later, we're quite big in Japan, and you know, we sell up and down the east coast of America this hard cider that we make, because a lot of apples grow here up in the mountains. We're the 7th biggest apple growing area in the United States. And yeah, he started this company with his friend, and so I invested in it, since television didn't seem to be a thing here really that was going to happen for me. So I thought, well, let's just do something else. And so I've enjoyed working with him and his friend to build this company and make it bigger. And it's just been, I think, because I was, you know, sticking feathers on things and ribbons, and it was just fun to, you know, toss kegs around. It just felt a bit more, as they say, macho here. But you say macho, don't you? Because being a puppeteer is not the most macho of activities, I guess.
How many years have you been working for the brand?
About 8 years. I think I invested 8 years ago, and yeah, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary, Noble Cider.
Wow, yeah.
It's good stuff.
Yeah, I'm a cider drinker, and I mentioned to you I'm from the county of Somerset, so not far from Bristol. And yeah, it's kind of the place for West Country.
Oh man,
cider, yeah.
We actually went on a cider tasting expedition, me and my nephew, in your area, and we certainly tried some very interesting ciders. Some of the taste profiles, like Barnyard and things, you know, that's certainly very interesting.
From puppetry, cider, and all your other creative endeavors, the last question, and then we come on to the quick fire questions shortly. But Robin, away from all your creative endeavors, what would you cite as your hobbies and interests? And then you have children and grandchildren. Tell us about them, and what are their thoughts on your career and the many programs you've made?
Yeah, I have some wonderful kids. You know, I have 4 kids really. I have Becky, O'Shawn, Aaron, and Rowan. And then I also have grandchildren, Tula and Zeffie, and I have a great nephew called Rowan as well. I think being a family man is, you know, the most fun thing you can do, really. I love being a granddad and a father. What are their I mean, they've always loved my shows. You know, there's nothing, and actually having O'Shawn and Becky in the house when they were little, when I was writing Rosie and Jim and Tots, was very helpful. seeing how children interact and, you know, fight over socks, and you know, I got a lot of ideas from watching my own children battle things out, or how they get along, and so that was very helpful. Yeah, they've always enjoyed, and that now Zeffie and Tula, my grandchildren, they also enjoy watching my shows, which is fun.
And aside from your work, what do you like to do to relax, and what are your interests and hobbies away from creativity?
I love swimming. That's my main exercise that I like to do. I actually, you know, because I've been away from puppetry and carving for a few years, I've just built this workshop, and I'm really looking forward to creating in here, and I'm excited about that. So it's kind of nice to have had a little bit of a gap and to be excited about creating again.
Robin Stevens, are you ready for this moment? I think
yeah.
I think your guest number 115
Wow.
I might be wrong, but I think that is correct. We ask
Wow.
every single guest these questions. They're quick fire questions and try and establish things we may not have discovered in the last 60 minutes
Sure.
about you. You don't need to think about these in any depth. Are you ready?
I am.
Robin Stevens, number one. What would you say is your favorite pastime?
Swimming.
Yeah, I'm an avid swimmer as well. I don't go enough these days. We obviously mentioned, we spoke about Labyrinth. We talk about cinema now. What would you say is your favorite film and why?
Sound of Music, I would say, just because I went to see it 7 times as a child, and it just, for some reason, I can't explain it really, just captured my imagination and just launched me on this career that we've been talking about.
We touched upon writing, but who would you say is your favorite novelist?
Well, I have to say Brandon Sanderson has got me through COVID. I read all of his books that he's ever read ever on audio books. And yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of people. So, but at the moment, I would say Brandon Sanderson.
Yeah, I've not come across him, sadly. What would you cite as some of his best work?
Ah, wow. What's that? The first one of, my goodness, I can't remember any names of his books right now. There's whole sections in the bookshop, though. Well, certainly here, if you go into it, can't remember the name.
Yeah, I'll definitely have a look.
Yeah.
From novelists now, we talk about professions, but if you could have had a different profession, what would it have been?
I think as we said earlier, I think being a crooner on a cruise ship or something would have been kind of fun, although I don't know how long it would have lasted.
I'm liking the sound of that. Inspirations now, but who in your life would you say has been the greatest inspiration?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, like I was saying, having mentors like John Blundall and Anne Wood was incredible gift, really, when you think about who's available in the world at that time. But I would say my father, Ted, was probably because as a man, it's great to have an amazing father. He was very self-deprecating and a good male role model, and just a good all-round gentle man, really.
From inspirational figures, we come on now to newspapers. Do you read a newspaper? And if so, which one?
I used to be an avid newspaper reader. When I used to work in Stratford-on-Avon and read The Independent every morning on my way to work. But now I do have to say that I don't think many of the news outlets actually are news outlets anymore, and I read Substack.
From newspapers now to food, what would you say is your favorite food?
Yeah, we do have a chocolate problem. We try to, avoid it, but we can't stop.
Cultural icons, we ask our guests to pick their favorite. When we say a cultural icon, it could be a figure from history, someone who's changed history in a positive way, political figure, maybe a filmmaker, a writer. Who would you choose?
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, I do a good Elvis impression. So, but I don't think Elvis is my. I mean, at the moment, I'm very impressed by a chap called Robert Kennedy here in America, who's just nominated himself to run for president.
From cultural icons now, we come on to curse words. What would you say is your favorite curse word and why?
Well, the wonderful thing about living in America is a lot of the time you can say words and they don't understand, they don't know what they mean. So words that we think are quite rude or actually don't mean anything. So something like bloody is not a word here at all, really. So, apart from they've heard it in Harry Potter. So anyway, I love saying bloody because it's it's a swear word that you can say here till you're blue in the face.
You've lived in England and now in the US, but what would you say is your favorite place or holiday destination?
Greece, I have to say. I've had such wonderful vacations or holidays in Greece. Something I still haven't done yet is we plan on going on a flotilla, a sailing holiday in Greece. That's something I would love to do one day.
Crooning, you've mentioned. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. But who would you say is your favorite music artist? And what would you cite as your favorite album?
I've been listening to a lot of Tim Minchin. I don't know if you've heard him, Australian chap.
Yeah.
He does comedy. He's making me laugh a lot at the moment, which is good, I think, in these days. And I don't know the names of any of his albums. The trouble is, I just listen to everything, as it just comes over and I never actually know the names of anything because I'm just listening to the words.
Do you have a favorite album, maybe growing up or at a specific time in your life, such as your teenage years, that kind of made a massive impact for a particular reason?
Yeah, the funny thing was going to a Waldorf school is you weren't, my mother wouldn't really encourage me to watch television or listen to pop music because so I was quite protected. I managed to persuade her to give me a tape recorder because I was going to record birds with it. And then my brother smuggled some, so I listened to like 4 tapes growing up, and that was it. I had the Eagles, I had a Jesus Christ Superstar, and I know them all by heart because I just listened to them over and over again. So those are the 6 albums I had were the ones. I do have this wonderful memory of we used to do these fates every year with my friends next door, and we had this big huge box. I guess something like a freezer had come in. On one end we had a record player with someone sitting in there, and the kids would pull these strings to choose which song they wanted to listen to. But of course on the day the record player broke, and so my dad got into this tiny little area designed for a child, and the kids were pulling all these strings for stories and songs, and he was mixing them all up and just telling stories to all the kids, joining them all together, and that was a good memory I have.
The next one, Robin, what would you say is your greatest achievement to date?
Wow. Yeah, I think parenting is probably the most amazing thing you can do with your life. I mean, I know there's lots of other amazing things to do, but I think that's the one that I feel the most, I feel best about, I suppose, having been a parent.
And then finally, Robin Stevens, how do you wish to be remembered?
Wow. I remember Anne Wood, my mentor, saying I was a little obsessed with this, but it is the thing that I was obsessed with, and I just wanted my shows to be full of love, and that's the thing that I really wanted to communicate. Everything else was a bit of just a sideshow for me. I think that communicating love and connection and honesty to children was something I tried to do in all my shows, and that's if I was going to be remembered for anything, would be it, I guess.
Some lovely positive words.
Huh.
And I should say, my final words, that is a wrap. Robin Stevens, thank you very kindly for being a guest on Your Take. A really interesting and, from my point of view, an enjoyable conversation or interview today. Thanks for sharing this incredible story of, all these amazing children's television shows you worked on. And a lot of them have brought back so much memories, even you citing things like Roland Rat, TVAM, Ragdoll Productions. They're part of our lives. They're really important shows that, when you look back at times, they bring back memories of where you were, where you saw these programs coming home, rushing home at 3 o'clock after junior school to switch on ITV or BBC and see these programs being played, you know, and yeah, they do mean such a lot. They're just great programs that probably most importantly, they've stood the test of time as well. So yeah, thank you kindly. Where do we find out more, and if maybe a film script will be produced, or do you have a website? How do we see more of your work, or is there an archive? Can we see them on YouTube? Where do we go?
Well, I do have a POB Facebook site. So just POB Facebook site, you know, is run by me. So if you need to contact me, that's a good first place to. Yeah, we are going to launch a website, but we have not done yet. My wife is called Kimberly Hodges, and her Etsy site is called Goldfish Marmalade. Yeah, we haven't launched the site yet, James. But thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you kindly. I wish you all the best with the cider brand. I hope another 10 years, and or any other endeavors that you might have up your sleeve in the future. I wish you all the very best.
Yeah, we will be launching a YouTube channel very soon to show Kimberly and my new shows. So we will be launching some new television shows in the future. Yeah.
Is there a name for the channel yet?
Not yet. No. Any suggestions? Gratefully received.
We'll watch the space, and
yeah.
Thank you kindly again for taking part in your take.